Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's March 9th, 2022, and today I just want to talk a little bit about using our equipment on our property, doing the work that we do with our tractors, excavators, track loaders, whatever the equipment is. And just talk about a couple of things that Neil from Messick's equipment, they sell Kubota tractors, New Holland, all sorts of big farm equipment as well. And so he had some really good insights, but this day and age with what's going on in world events, fuel prices are going up all over the place. So I thought I'd start off with a quick news clip from yesterday.
The International Monetary Fund says Russia's invasion of Ukraine will have a severe impact on the global economy. The ripple effects are already being felt here in the U.S. CBS's Lilia Luciano is at a gas station in Southern California where the sign says it all. Lilia?
Adriana, and that's not even the worst in this area. Look, gas prices here in California tend to be more expensive than in other parts of the country, but here and nationwide, we're seeing gas prices as high as we've seen in nearly a decade.
So the day before yesterday, my fuel tank, I hadn't really filled it up in a long time because I haven't been using my truck, but I ended up going to the gas station. And it was over $4.50 a gallon, I believe. And so, you know, I almost filled the truck up. I should have filled it up all the way. But with gas prices being as high as they are, one of the things I think about are how are we going to try and save on fuel economy and still get some of the work done that we want to get done with our heavy equipment. Neil from Messick's, so Neil did a really good job of introducing this topic. So let's listen to what Neil had to say.
But that and maybe teach you a little bit about your machine and how the torque and fuel economy of your engine may not behave in exactly the way that you expect.
Messick's, a helping hand with your land.
We recently wrapped up Open House, and as part of that event every year, we give a series of seminars on equipment usage and tips and repair and maintenance on all kinds of different machinery. They're generally quite informative. One of the ones that I participated in this year was something we called Hot Topics on compact tractors. And one of the topics that we discussed was engine RPMs and how putting your tractor around at low revs is not really a good thing for your equipment and the different things that kind of impacts, right, when it comes to your hydraulics and your engine and the different components of your machine. But one of the interesting things that came out of that conversation was a note from a Kubota service rep who was sitting in the back of the crowd, probably making sure I didn't say anything stupid. But one of the things that he pointed out was a service experience that he had with a customer in regards to an SVL 75. The specific experience that he had with that guy was a complaint about poor fuel economy from the machine. Now, as they went out and they started watching this customer operate, they learned that the guy was using the piece of equipment almost at idle, right? Running that around at really low RPMs. Now, if you're used to equipment from years ago, old ones with old mechanical fuel injection in them, the fuel usage of your machine is pretty linear, right? As you rev that engine up, the fuel usage goes up proportionally, right? It's not a direct relationship, but if you pull out a fuel usage graph off of an older engine, you'll see it's kind of linear, right? As that engine RPM goes up, the thing burns more fuel. What this gentleman pointed out here was that for a modern machine like this SVL 75, that's not actually the case. The fuel usage is not that linear graph like you would expect. It actually is a bit of a bathtub. It's a bit of a smiley face. These modern machines actually burn more fuel at idle and at low revs than they do when you start to crank it up a little bit. If you take a look at this chart right here off of this V3800, okay? It's one of the ones that I picked here because it had some of the best available graphics and stuff that we could get some clear images off of. You're gonna notice right here, when you start this thing up and you idle it at 1200 RPMs, it's using nearly the same amount of fuel that would also be using at about 2150 RPMs. 1200 RPMs and 2150 RPMs use basically the same amount of fuel. Now, obviously, you're creating a lot different horsepower, right? You would be measuring it in kilowatts here, like the chart is done. Somewhere around 47 kilowatts when you're there at idle, but once you rev that thing up to 2150, you're up to about 80, burning basically the same amount of fuel, right? The fuel usage on these modern engines has this kind of curve to it, right? A shallow smiley face, call it that. And you're not necessarily saving that fuel by running that machine really slow. You're also doing damage to the machine in a couple of other places. The other tractor system that benefits from a little bit more engine RPM is going to be the hydraulic system on your equipment. Those pumps are made to pump at speed, right? When things are moving more quickly, when that fluid is starting to warm up, things are going to work the most efficiently. If you don't have the right fluid in there, or the fluid is really thick, you can actually get a little bit of cavitation and stuff in those pumps as that's being pulled into the thing. And you can hear that sometimes in terms of like odd squealing sounds and that kind of stuff that might come from your equipment. Now, while that doesn't do immediate damage, it does increase the amount of wear that's happening on those pumps. So when you're running that engine at low RPMs, not only are you burning more fuel for the amount of horsepower that you're getting off your machine, you're also making it more difficult for your equipment to work because that fluid is not coming up the temperature and the pumps aren't pumping it efficiently. Now, when we're keeping our eyes on these engine performance charts here that we're looking at, you're going to notice that the torque rise, the torque curve of the engine is different on these newer modern engines than it is on the ones from years ago. On these older engines, if you pull out the torque curve off of an older, say, Tier 2 or prior engine, you're going to notice that as engine RPMs goes up, the torque drops down in a fairly linear manner. However, these newer machines with the common rail diesels and the turbochargers and all the other stuff that we put on an engine today does have a bit of a curve to it, and you actually don't have the maximum amount of engine torque, right? That lugging ability that we get from these small diesels at low RPMs, and it's when you start to raise that up again that you really give your engine the ability in order to work, and you pick up that luggability and stuff as that engine starts to speed up. Now that does continue down a little bit as you start to rev that machine up further, but again, those really low RPMs and down at near idle, just there's very little sense to make your engine work that hard. In addition to the operation of your engine and hydraulic system being better once you raise those engine RPMs up a little bit, if you have a machine over 26 horsepower, more than likely you also have an after-treatment system bolted onto the exhaust that also works better when the engine is running hotter. There's going to be a DPF or a DOC diesel oxidation catalyst, one of the two, capturing that soot that's coming off of your engine, and that entire system relies on heat in order to burn that soot off properly, whether it's passively or actively regenning. Heat is good, so all of that added heat and combustion efficiency that comes from revving that engine up is good in all of those areas.
Okay. So Neil made some really good points, and so what I ended up doing was pulling different performance curves for each one of the motors that I have in all of the pieces of equipment that I own. And just like Neil said, it's really interesting when we look at these performance curves. So so we can look at down here the amount of fuel that we're actually using at the various RPMs and power. So here's our torque up here, and torque is the force that's applied to a shaft, a rotational force, like coming off your PTO or coming off the engine. Torque is that effect that you feel. The higher the torque you have, the more that sets you back in the seat when you hit the accelerator. Just like an electric vehicle, boy, when you hit that accelerator, you get set back in your seat. Where horsepower is that I think of it more as that high-end speed that you're going to get out of the engine as a result of gearing as well. So like Neil said, all of these things are so important. The point that I wanted to make in today's video is just what Neil talked about down here. So when we look at the fuel efficiency, this lower curve down here, when we're at just under 1200 RPMs at about probably 1100 RPMs, our fuel consumption is about comparable to 2000 RPMs. That's absolutely amazing that when you're having the engine idle, you've got less horsepower and you're able to do less work. You're not heating up the engine like you want to do. So with your diesel particulate filter, you want that engine at higher RPMs so that you're burning off the soot and creating less damage. You're warming up, you're changing the viscosity of the hydraulic fluid, you're changing the viscosity of the motor oil and transmission fluids as well. So you're able to get more work out of the piece of equipment while actually saving fuel by, you really don't see much in this particular one. This is in one of my Takeuchi engines. So we really don't start to increase our fuel consumption until we're getting up close to 2200 RPMs. So by running your piece of equipment at low RPMs, thinking that you're saving a significant amount of fuel, you may be doing some damage to your piece of equipment. And hopefully someday I'll make a video on the hydrostatic transmissions like in my Kubota tractors and the Kubota zero-turn mower. So one of the things is if you don't have the RPMs high enough, you start to hear a little bit of a whining sound where you're sending the hydrostatics into flow-by, and you're decreasing the efficiency or the effectiveness of pressing the accelerator to get work done. And you're creating more labor on the piece of equipment. You're making it work harder, but you're bypassing the efficiency of it. So that's in the times when we have these high fuel prices and all, we may want to run our pieces of equipment at lower RPMs, thinking that we're saving fuel, but we're getting less work done. We're not really saving any fuel, and we may put more wear and tear on our equipment and force in some of our pieces of equipment to go into a regenerative state and burn more fuel at the end of it, because our diesel particulate filters are getting plugged up and they have to run the engine at high RPMs, and you may not be doing anything with that piece of equipment at that time. So without making this video any longer, I thought that it'd be valuable for people to just look at their performance curves of your engines. You can usually get that off of your piece of equipment, look it up online, and just Google performance curves. And I've got one for each one of my tractors, and also and the excavator and the track loader. So that really helps out a lot. So I thought that Neil from Messick's Tractor there, or Messick's Equipment, really does a great job. I'll try to put a link to their website down below, and I'll be making a video in the near future where I think new tractor owners, or even someone like me, someone who's had tractors for over 4 decades and heavy pieces of equipment, I'm always learning from some of these YouTube channels. So I'll be sharing that in the future as well. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Give us a thumbs up if you found this of value. And by all means, folks, share it with your friends and stay healthy and stay safe. Bye-bye now.